Um, Welcome to the 2032 Conversation on Queer Futures. We are starting off with showing a very short 1 minute from a friend of Resilience 2032 and a queer Indigenous artist that is also a filmmaker and wanted us to show this video, this dance video that she created. And we will be sharing her contact details in the chat for you to follow. I don't know if we can hear, I don't think we can hear audio, Christy.
Denunciamos a la presencia paramilitares de la revolución. Yo fui a la revolución.
Thank you. That was artist Maria Moratella Mayes. She's an Indigenous queer filmmaker, and she wanted me to share with you that protecting the sacred is queer futures, and the sacred is all that bears life. Thank you, and shout out to Maria for her filmmaking work. You can support her work on her website, Thriving Rhythms, and she is love.liberate on Instagram, and it'll be in the chat very shortly. And we are also really honored today at Resilience to be joined by activist, artist, performer, and activist specifically amplifying trans and Indigenous voices, Lara Americo. Lara is going to be performing live. Lara, I hand it over to you.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Okay, and now I'm nervous. I'm yeah, so I live in New York, and coronavirus hit us pretty hard. But even before that, trans, Black and Brown and Indigenous people were being hit hard before any of this happened. And it just has become even harder to survive and to thrive as a trans or queer, Indigenous, Black or Brown person. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, especially now that Pride is happening and Pride is around, which I'm really happy that Pride in New York has turned into Pride again, instead of corporate parades and floats and pinkwashing. It's actual protests against oppression, which I quite enjoy. Anyways, I'm a writer, I'm a musician and an artist, and I'm going to play a song. So let's just jump right into it so I can shake the nerves out.
Yeah, we unfortunately have bad audio, but we will be sure to get this recorded, to get you to perform with better audio, and then put that out into the
and share on our social.
And share on our social too. We're so sorry that the audio is not great.
No, it's that Corona problems.
Lara, thank you so much. I know you're going to stick around with us for the conversation, hopefully maybe your laptop is working by then so that you have better audio, or that maybe you can join from another phone, or let's see if the audio gets better. I
Oh, you muted. Oh. Sorry, you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So, so at Resilience, as we look to the future and actively work to create a better future, we must first acknowledge the past and the present. Before we start our conversations, we lead with a land acknowledgement. So, also for those of you that do not know me, my name is Noor, and I'm joining you today from the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people in Brooklyn, New York. And my pronouns are she, her. And I hand it over to Mikaela Gershenson, who is the founder of Good, Better, Best, and who is an educator, an artist, and a social justice advocate that is a member of the Resilience family and leads our land acknowledgements every week. Mikaela, thank you always for being with us, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome. I wanted to give thanks for this morning, and just to start with that, give thanks for our breath. And I'd like to ground our conversation today by acknowledging the land that I'm calling in from. And for those of you that may not be familiar with this process, it's the process of deliberately naming that this is Indigenous land and that Indigenous people have rights to this land. And so in that right, I was born and raised in Alaska, the land of the Eklutna and Knik people. I was studied in California on the land of the Ohlone. And for our conversation today, I wish to call on the stewards of the land I'm currently occupying here in New York, the Lenape, the Canarsie, and the Wapinga First Nations people. And as I was meditating this morning about our conversation, the word privilege came to mind. And just thinking about how in the past 2 weeks, this veil has been lifted and people are starting to acknowledge different layers of privilege. And this morning, I was reflecting on my own relative privilege as a heterosexual, cisgendered woman. And the learning is always happening. And in part of my own learning, I started learning that there's this term, the two-spirit, which is used in some Indigenous cultures to describe Native people in the community that hold a special role, a traditional third gender ceremonial and social role in their cultures. And so as we are beginning and continuing this conversation about liberation for all and work for the reclamation of the totality of each of our own being, but also our collective totality, I encourage you to honor the land that you're occupying, but also take a moment and honor the body that you're occupying. And I am excited for this conversation to deepen all of our relationships to ourselves, because we are just spirits in this body. So thank you for always having me in this space, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mikaela, for grounding us into what is important as we dive into this conversation and into this moment and movement that we are all living through. Before we dive into our conversation, I very quickly want to introduce Resilience, our project, so you understand the context from which these conversations arise. So these conversations are research for a social media theater experience that we are producing that will start this August until October 12th, which will October 12th will be the election day in our 2032 alternate reality. That day is Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly known as Columbus Day, and now Election Day. And the year 2032 happens to be 2 years after the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And yeah, there's a US election happening, and it will unfold on social media and multiple platforms. And this is a space where we bring together experts and thought leaders to help us unpack elements that are shaping our present and will be shaping our future, from climate change to the issues around our data ecosystem and the future of technology, to systemic inequality. And so we are really honored to be joined by Mikaela and Soham, which I'll introduce very briefly. Christy, did I forget anything?
I just wanted to emphasize why we think about the future.
Yeah.
And I think we sort of touched on it a little bit throughout these moments of like reflecting on the past to look towards the future. But it's not like we're trying to predict the future, but we're trying to make the future more tangible so that we can have a better understanding of what we need to do to move towards a future that we want to see, and a better understanding of the complexities of all of the issues that are happening, so that we can unpack at a deeper level the things that we don't want to be seeing, and what we can do to prevent them and to address them before they become crises.
Yes, and if we have learned anything from these conversations, is that they are truly interconnected and global issues, and that our attention is required even more and more now than it ever was. Our attention and activism as well, or action. And with that, today our conversation is on exploring queer futures, and we are honored to be joined by Mikaela Berry. Mikaela is a playwright, a committed educator, an empathetic creator, and a deep thinker focused on creating spaces in which marginalized voices can be heard and encouraged. Mikaela has taught storytelling and theatrical expression to young women inmates at Riker's Island, in addition to facilitating restorative justice healing circles. Mikaela is also a founding member of the Swipe It Forward initiative and an activist, and we are very grateful you are joining us today. We also have Soham Joglekar. Is that correct, Soham? Okay. He is a creative executive for a US-based production company with a passion for fostering bold and new, exciting voices in film, television, theater, and in publishing. He has spent numerous years in the entertainment industry and has garnered a lot of knowledge across all facets of the business, including development, publicity, and talent management. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I want to acknowledge that we had a learning moment in the resilience team today, where we realized that yes, we lead lag acknowledgements, but we have failed to introduce our pronouns. And so I thought maybe we could start off with you kind of outlining for us and our community the importance of starting off by introducing our pronouns as a practice. Mikaela?
So including your pronouns increasingly now in Zoom meetings, but also in our Instagram bios, in our email signatures, is an easy way to sort of, I hate the word normalize, it gets so commodified at this point, but it's an easy way to kind of just introduce the fact that you can't assume another person's gender identity or expression or pronouns by looking at them, or just by looking at their name. And it's a way to kind of just bring awareness to the fact that we do have diversity in gender, and what you perceive may not necessarily be what that person identifies as. And it's very exciting to see this increase in pronoun usage, and including it in just basic things, and also just as you introduce yourself, being like, I use she, her pronouns, because it allows space for other people to share about their gender identity and expression without shame.
100%. And it also, I think, to Mikaela's point, it also puts the burden, takes the burden sort of off non-binary people who often have to do the labor of coming forth and bringing up the issue of the binary first. So I think, as Mikaela said, you know, to use this word normalize, but yes, just making it sort of a part of the fabric of our lives so that it becomes the same thing as introducing yourself and saying your name, you know, just putting it up front so that it's not, the burden is not always on those who shouldn't have to necessarily have that burden.
Yes, thank you. Well said. We invite all of the community that are with us today to add your pronouns onto your names, which you can do on Zoom. So, all right, we are living in a pandemic. I have to say very quickly that when we started off with these conversations, it was before the pandemic, and we started off with a panel on climate, with climate scientists and experts on sustainability, and we were exploring what kind of action we need to take over the next few years to prevent. I mean, we are already in a climate emergency moment, but we talked about how maybe pandemics of the future could be too off-putting or dystopic for our participants, yet a month later we are living in a global pandemic. So my question to you is, in light of these changes, the global pandemic, the racism pandemic, homophobic global pandemic, if I can call it that as well. What do you see clearly now that you didn't see a few months ago?
You want to go?
Mikaela, you want me to? It's up to you. You go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I see so much more clearly the need for, and this is something that I have known for my entire being, just existing as a Black queer woman. But just the need, the desire, and the clear conversation around the difference between defunding, divesting, and abolition. And we are now, like, the conversation on what the abolishment of these super harmful systems is becoming more commonplace, and, you know, is circulating more widely. And I think that directly ties to, you know, gender, because if we abolish the binary that exists, you know, that prevents us from being our full selves and living our full lives gender-wise, if we can abolish that system, then we can actively and more effectively move towards the abolition of capitalism, the patriarchy, and racism. Like, if you think of like all of the problems that we have in America as like a tree, those are the three roots, right? So if we want to come out of this transformed and different, those are the three things we need to attack, not just by small change, but by completely uprooting and planting something new. And I think that that's a conversation, at least to me, that's becoming a lot more clear. And I believe it's more clear to me now because other people are kind of co-signing it. Like, I felt a little bit alone in this thought, and now people are more outwardly discussing this. And I'm really energized by that.
Agreed. I think, you know, I completely agree. I think that's something that's sort of come into focus for me a lot, especially over the last 2 months, 4 months, is that there, thankfully, I think a lot of people who were asleep are now awake. And I think there's an awareness that's really come. I think a lot about a quote by this queer theorist that I love named Jose Munoz, who talks about visibility. Visibility is a trap. And it was actually started by Foucault talking about prison abolition. But I think that we, for the last couple of years, have been living under the guise of like, we have representation, things are okay. There's gays are on TV now, it's okay. There's, you know, we have Ava DuVernay, so like racism doesn't exist. And I think that there are these ways in which many of our biggest social structures and our capitalist structures have been very self-congratulatory. Like, you know, we've given you, there's visibility out there. Things like this exist. You know, be thankful, don't push for more. And I think that this moment was a really strong reckoning of this isn't enough. And even though, you know, we've been told to be placated with these sort of things, like be happy because X, Y, and Z exists. I think you're seeing now the tide turning, and those of us who are queer or Black, Brown, Indigenous, really saying this is enough and we need to push for more to create the kind of complete and utter revolutionary change that we want. And so, you know, I think in just from what I do, it's been important, especially working in Hollywood, where people are so self-congratulatory about representation, the kind of voices they're amplifying, and oh, we have, you know, we have shows and we have this and we have diversity and we have Black and Brown assistants. And it's like, yes, but now the conversation can go further. Why are the people, the queer and Black and Brown Indigenous people in your company always the assistant level? Why is there not social mobility or sort of employee mobility for these people? Why are stories about trans women being told by cis heterosexual white men? I think that we're now in this kind of moment seeing that awareness and that change in a way that I've never seen before. And it makes me very hopeful. I'm still I have a lot of doubt and I'm a cynic about my industry. So it makes me hopeful and on a personal level, but it just also empowers me to hold, you know, people even more to the fire and hold myself accountable.
Yes, you used probably my favorite word, accountable. We are talking a lot about accountability and what that looks like. And what I think people don't, and this is something that we were talking about this before we started, but you know, how quickly information spreads on Twitter is so incredible, but also can be so damaging. And, you know, cancel culture is a huge thing that we have to deal with and talk about. And that doesn't work, right? Canceling someone because they, you know, said something that was harmful is how are they going to learn from that? And so when we talk about accountability and we talk about, like, you know, transformative justice and what that looks like and how to come into, we are really trying to transform this world. We're not just trying to, like, you know, make a couple of changes. We need to completely rethink the way that we care for each other, the way that we show up for each other, the way that we show up for ourselves. And that all comes with being held accountable for our actions. It's constant work, making sure that you are showing up in the right ways, you know, understanding that you will be wrong sometimes, and like understanding that all of this is a teachable moment because we are all working towards this collective goal of a community transformed. And so accountability is a word that also gets, you know, I'm seeing a lot of words just get just sound bites almost just like thrown around, but like accountability is a big word. It's a tough practice, and it's something that is necessary as we continue on in this work, as we continue on with our momentum. You know, you have to be able, like, it's just necessary. Clarity, accountability, transparency are like the only ways that we're going to be able to move on, like, at all.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's interesting. I'm wondering if, Mikaela, you've seen this too, but I've noticed, and I've been talking to a lot of my white friends or white allies, non-Black allies, who are sort of saying, like, I want to defriend the people in my life that aren't as angry about this, or I want to cut these people out of my life. And I've said, like, you know, for so long, Black people and Brown people have really had to unfortunately come from a place of understanding to try to move the needle, even when you don't want to. And I think that now that sort of very labor-intensive, exhausting process of coming from a place of understanding with your family members or with your friends that aren't posting, like, that's now the work of us as non-Black people in this current moment. And I think that's the same goes for queer liberation. Like, the onus is on the ally now to do the work. It's very easy to cut off your friends or cut off the girl that you went to high school with, that you're kind of close with and you see every time you're home. It's very easy to cut her off. It's a lot more difficult to, when you see her and catch up for drinks, to sort of engage in this conversation. That's where the real work happens. And I think that's where, that's where the onus is on allies to really kind of work through those conversations. And again, by holding yourself accountable, hold the people in your life accountable.
Yeah, and it's difficult, you know, we don't want to have those conversations. It's so much easier to unfriend or block. And I personally, like, I don't engage in those conversations because as a Black queer woman, my existence, that's all I can do right now. But I have seen a lot of people. A thing that annoys me, and I just, to be completely honest, is like this conversation on like allyship fatigue, or like, well, I'm sorry, I don't care that you're tired. I have had to be exist in this body as a Black queer woman and have constant threats to my life from birth to now, and that's exhausting. It's a full-time job being a Black woman. So the fact that you're tired, I understand that that's a part of the process, but you don't tell me. I don't want to hear about it. Like, you can be tired, but like that's just not something that like I feel like is conducive to the movement. It's like you will get tired. Yes, I don't care though. Like, you still have to continue ways to like engage in that. And I know that sounds a little bit callous, but also just like, coming from me, I just that doesn't do anything for me. And I think we should all be, just intention is really, really important too, especially in the way that we present ourselves on social media with each other, especially in this pandemic where we are spending a lot of our time online. You be intentional about the way you show up, be intentional about what you post. People are looking and paying attention, and it's not just like BS. Yeah, but I have noticed a lot of that allyship fatigue, and I'm like, you just learned about racism too.
As have I. It just seems like a very counterproductive like place to take the discourse. It's like, no. Like, we're still here. Like, it's so early in the process to get fatigued. That being said, I mean, I believe like everyone should take time for self-care, in order to be the best sort of person in this movement that you can be. But you're right, Mikaela, I don't really know why that even has become a term or a buzzword that I've been seeing around. And to my earlier point, it's like, yes, exactly as you said, like the onus isn't on Black people to like come from a place of understanding anymore. It's like, that time has elapsed. Like it's the exhaustion, the fatigue of that is like we're in too deep. So it's like when I mean like people need to come from a gentler place, I'm directly speaking to, white and non-Black people who want to be allies. It's on you to do the labor-intensive, exhausting, I really want to end this conversation, but I shouldn't kind of work that like so many Black queer people have been doing for, centuries.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the word ally, right? That gets thrown around a lot too. And like, what does that mean? What does it mean to say that you are, like there's this conversation that I saw on an Instagram post, because people are really good at disseminating information on Instagram. It's crazy. But the idea of like the difference between allyship and being an ally and being an accomplice. An ally feels like a little bit passive, right? So you can say that you're an ally, but like, what does that actively mean? What are the things that you are actively doing for these marginalized communities? Like, how are you showing up? Whereas like being an accomplice is a little bit more active. And it's hard work. It's not just slapping on a rainbow sticker or like say hashtagging Black Lives Matter and like calling it a day. It's checking in with your friends of color. Like, I have had some incredible allyship moments from white people in my life that have just been like, how can I support you today? I'm going to send you food at this time. I'm going to, or just like Venmoing me $10. None of that like apologetic, I'm so sorry that racism exists. Just like actively, how can I work, show up for you and work alongside you? And that should be the work of anybody who is trying to be an accomplice to like marginalized. Sure. It's always that consistent question of how can I be intentional about the way I'm showing up, and what tangible things can I do, can I bring, can I, change, so that I can continue to protect and like lift this marginalized group towards equity.
Absolutely.
Wow, such important points. I want to point out, and thank you for defining allyship, because we talked about the future of allyship a few weeks ago, and I think it's such an important reminder, and a few themes that have come up over the last week that you both touched, the last few weeks that you've both touched on, which is that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not paying attention, and if you're not uncomfortable in this moment, you're not doing the work. And that it is a muscle, and anti-racism work requires everybody's active and constant attention. And two, that canceling cancel culture is important, or because these conversations are very difficult. to be having with, I know a lot of people that are struggling to have very difficult conversations with their family members, but this moment is kind of asking them or demanding that they have that conversation. Like the conversation can no longer be delayed. And I think that's promising to see. I want to take a step back and acknowledge that 2 days ago, 5 years ago, the Obama administration lit up the White House in rainbow colors. And we, 5 years on, how are you feeling about this, what it means to be queer in America?
Well, 17,000 people, over, I think it was actually 30,000 people dressed in white, walked in Brooklyn for Black trans lives. It was fantastic. If you don't know Ann Field Stewart, who is one of the organizers, she is a dear friend of mine. I am so proud of her, the way that these, in the face of, like, Black trans women just get killed more than anyone else. They go missing, they get killed, they get murdered. And to so boldly walk and beautifully walk in the face of that was such a chilling and beautiful, it was so beautiful to see. It was a beautiful image to see Ian talk about, you know, we're not going to be silenced, you have to stop killing us, I think is incredibly important. Angela Davis actually was just speaking about how trans people are really like at the forefront of the movement, and like by abolishing the gender binary and like the conversation that trans folks have, and those who are you know, just gender like non-binary, the conversations that they have and their ability to conceptualize like, you know, a life without borders or without rigid structure is a thing that we can apply to our abolitionist practice in every sense. So we can apply that to the prison industrial complex, which is directly related to the police. We can apply this to the capitalism. You know, there's so many things that need to be attacked. But I think that, like, you know, I think Laura said that it, but Pride is actually Pride this year. Like Pride is a riot, founded and started by Black trans women, and that will, like, that has to be addressed. And we are starting to talk about what protection means for Black trans people in a way that we just haven't before. Mm-hmm. And that is incredibly exciting to me because that directly affects my community. I think we have a long way to go. I don't care about any corporations display or organizations display of like pride or allyship or whatever. I don't care about any of that. I care about what can I hold on to? Rainbows are so pretty and I love them, but like, what are you know, what's going on? Like, how are we going to actively build community, care for each other, and protect each other? And we're starting to have this conversation. It's definitely rooted in community care, because any system that's put in place right now honestly has to go. Like, I love Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but like, she still works within the system that is designed to kill us, despite how cool she is and how great she is. But so, you know, I think it's really interesting to be in this time, because the movement that I see on like the streets, or you know, like when we talk about the movement, when we talk about revolution, it's Black queer women leading it, running it. And that's always been the case. And now I think there's finally that's getting some recognition. And people are finally like, oh, we should listen to them. Like, oh, this is a group that knows what they're doing, and they're doing it courageously and bravely, and we need to support them and not like silence them. And that conversation is happening a little bit more freely and openly than it has in the past. I'm skeptical of all of it, because everything is sensationalized, and I'm scared about momentum, and I just, I'm thinking about all of the things that could thwart kind of everyone's energy right now. But I think we're in a place where we could see abolition of major structures happen in our lifetimes, I would say, if we continue this. So
I completely agree. I mean, I think that, I love what Angela Davis said, which is about the very existence of trans people makes the idea of liberation possible, which is just such a strong, profound statement. And I think that, to your point, Noor, I remember when, what I'm about to say, I don't want in any way to sort of seem like I was against. Obviously, as a gay man, I was very happy to see, DACA, the Defense Against Marriage Act sort of be taken down. I was really happy to see, you know, the White House lit up in rainbow colors, but there's a way in which even the sort of push for marriage by queer activists on the ground was always not the first fight. You know, I remember so many of us were talking back then about like, why marriage? Like what a heteronormative institution to try to push for us to be a part of. I mean, and that sort of, that 5-year trajectory tells us where the movement's gone in these 5 years alone, is that, you know, that we were trying to be part of the system. We were trying to say, we deserve the same rights. And which don't get me wrong, a lot of people, me saying this doesn't negate that that's true, but it just means that that was the first and sort of huge push. Same thing when you look at the sort of rhetoric that was going on back then about Born This Way. It was like, it's not a choice. The sort of being queer meant that you have to defend it by saying it wasn't a choice. I was born this way. It wasn't a choice. This is what was upon me, and because of that, I should be able to do what I want. And it was still sort of queer people having to give a reason. And I think that, so as much as it made me happy to see the White House lit up in rainbow colors at the time, and it was this big victory, it also felt to a lot of queer people on the ground at the time like, this isn't enough. Like this barely does anything. Marriage isn't the sort of first step for so many of us. It's not even step 5, 6, 7, 8. And so as Mikaela said, seeing the march and seeing, you know, this insanely massive group of people sort of mobilize in the name of liberation is, I think, the biggest change we can see in those 5 years. You know, I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was like white women wearing wedding dresses walking across the Brooklyn Bridge to fight for marriage equality. We're not there yet. We've moved past that. You know, I think that, and that sort of shows us where the movement has sort of come from. Now we're not trying to be part of the system. We're trying to actually participate in liberation. And what does that mean? And how do we move that project forward?
Yeah, there's no queer liberation or liberation at all without abolition. Those two things go hand in hand. If we're going to like win and be free, like there's so much has to be just like burned down. And I don't mean that in terms of like, you know, destroying property, but I kind of also do. And so, yeah, I just, you know, these gestures are not enough. And I totally agree with that. We have there's deeper work that needs to be done.
Yeah, we were saying also in one of our conversations that it's not about creating a seat at the table, it's about dismantling the table and building a new one. Mm-hmm. You talk about an important, very important point you bring up, Mikaela, abolition. I want to talk about Layleen Polanco and her death. I know that yesterday, the New York mayor announced that 17 of these staffers, including a captain, were suspended without pay immediately. This is an action that it took over a year for us to get to. I know that this is an area you've done a lot of work with prison reform, Mikaela, so I'd love to get your perspective on what Layleen Polanco's death represents and what we can do to center trans voices and whatever actions you think that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah. So yeah, like I was working at Rikers actually at the time of her death, and she was at the Rosie Singer Center when she was murdered. I just don't believe anything other than the fact that harm was caused to her, because prisons are just inherently horrible, horrible places. And the way that just dehumanizing, like teaching at Rikers at the Rosie Singer Center, like just as a person, I never left working at Rikers without a headache, just because of how just everything that the institution represents. And we were no longer allowed to have programming during the investigation. Outside people were actually not allowed to continue their programming as they were doing like an internal investigation. But the way that trans women are treated and so often not put in the right housing, are oftentimes housed with men. They actually, in my time at Rikers 2 or 3 years ago, they were moving trans women from men's facilities to the women's facilities. And so, I mean, I I don't think prison should exist. So that's just my thing, is like, just read Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis and like get down with the get down of abolishing the prison industrial complex. That's like just basic work. The other work is just like, listen to trans women. Listen, they are leading and they are doing so much work to protect each other and protect each other from a community level. Throw your money towards them. The Okra Project, For the Girls are just two that I support and follow along with really well. But if you just do the research, put your money where your mouth is, basically. And if you consider yourself an ally or an accomplice, as we talk about it, like, are you actively financially supporting? Because that's a lot of what trans women need, is financial support for gender affirmation surgery, support for housing. And that's a basic need, but it's a big thing that you can do. Is there's always a GoFundMe for somebody wanting their surgery that you can donate to. There's always, small things, just chip in $20. Like, that's a very easy kind of tangible way that you can do that. And also just uplifting and supporting and protecting trans women actively, which means if we're in this community where we're talking about community care and we know that there isn't a specific group that is at a higher risk of being just murdered or harassed, and you can put your body on the line, you should. Allyship and being an accomplice means that you should be actively willing to put your body on the line to protect other people, because that's how we're going to win.
And I also just think, to Mikaela's point, a really important factor when we talk about abolition, on the other side, which is that, especially when it comes to trans women and trans women of color, is decriminalizing sex work. And I think that that's the sort of primary place that we can start of, there is I forget to the exact statistic, but so many of the trans women that end up in Rikers or end up in prisons are tied to sex work. And so I know the ACLU is doing a lot of work to push for the decriminalization and deregulation and all those things. I think it's a really important aspect of that mission. I think that, but as Mikaela said, I mean, there really is, at this point, it's very light work to believe that prisons should be obsolete. I mean, I think that abolition is just a central part of that strategy, but I think that, we can, while we work towards that, it's really important to address this other issue of the fact that literally trans women are being arrested for participating in these underground economies that are often their only option and method of survival. And so that's just a big part that I feel very passionately about as well.
Yes, and Jassy in the chat mentions, and she also is pointing out that the police are a part of that. And I want to invite everyone to please continue your thoughts in the chat, but also we would love to hear your questions and to hear from you. You can use the raise your hand feature or put your question in the chat. Okay, let's go to the future, because we are talking about queer futures. And I want to get your thoughts about what is something that you hope to see in our 2032 future. Yes. What are your hopes for the future?
No more police.
No more police.
And just as they exist now, none of that, no more of it. And I think that is an achievable goal as we talk about divesting, and we're starting to talk about, or just like understand have the public knowledge of like how much money police forces have, and how that money can just be so much more effectively spent in literally anywhere else. And I think that we are actually, especially in everything that's happening with Minneapolis, announcing that they were disbanding their police force, despite the fact that they are now going to just use state police, is a step. And continuing on in those steps of like abolishing the police, because I feel like that's where the most kind of like concerted efforts are right now, which I think is fantastic. And then once we start to like work towards that and actively, which requires a lot of being on the ground, showing up at Mayor de Blasio's house and not letting him sleep until he signs certain bills, showing up to city council meetings, doing that, which are so boring. They're so boring. But showing up with knowing who your like public advocates are, knowing who those people are, and harassing the hell out of them until you get what you want. Just be loud and don't back down, and be unwavering, and like just be as loud as possible about it for as long as you need to. And I think that by 2032, I would like to see at least a different conceptualization of what the police are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I could not agree more. I think from a sort of like cultural perspective, I think obviously in addition to seeing like sex work being decriminalized, I would really like to see, our cultural spheres really doing the work and walking the walk when it comes to storytellers, authentically being able to tell their stories, representation, not just being a figurehead of like, oh, we cast a couple people here. I want, as someone who is producing and who tries to look for, writers who want to tell authentic stories. Like I said, I think my greatest hope is that by 2032, we really are seeing a truly diverse breadth. I mean, the word diverse has become like, gives me like nausea now, but I do hope to, by 2032, genuinely have a wide breadth of stories and narratives and writers and artists and cultural thinkers. And I want, the work to be put out there to really be moving the needle on liberation. I think that liberation is a lifelong process, and it's one of the most kind of correct, Jazzy. I think what you just said, I completely agree with, which is, nuanced stories are liberating. Like that's where, the ability to authentically tell your own story is the first kind of step in liberation. And so by the future, and that work is already starting. Like, some of the most incredible and prominent Black thinkers and artists have pulled together and have signed sort of a document that's holding Hollywood accountable. No more police narratives, no more, no more, we don't need to be in the business with LAPD the way that a lot of studios in Los Angeles are, And so I think that work is already being started, but on on the larger level, just really by 2032, seeing artists making the work and being free to make the work that they want to make, I think is the greatest hope that I could have for the future. One of the greatest hopes.
Mikaela, did you want to respond to that?
No,
Okay, cool. This is also your space, Soham, and I think entertainment and the narratives and who's telling the story and what kinds of stories and is important to acknowledge in this conversation. Jassy is bringing up in the chat that like the Kerry Washington being one of the Black female only primetime TV drama, what leads in 2011 was major. What do we think in 12 years from now? What kinds of stories are we going to be seeing? Do you think language is going to be different, or the way we talk about queer identity is going to be different in 2032?
I hope that, when I think about the word queer, I think about it in every sense of the word, including the verb. So I hope that like we're resisting heteronormative or like normative notions across the board. So maybe that means resisting format. I think that there's a lot of Black and brown poets doing incredible work to sort of like push back against the like poetry sphere, like the dominant poetry sphere. I think that you have a lot of filmmakers really pushing against what they were told they could do or what kind of stories they had to tell. So I think that like by that I mean like, artists being able to, and I work in TV and film, sort of pushing against and telling stories that would never have been thought possible. I saw a play last year that some of you may have seen who live in New York, maybe it was 2 years ago, called Fairview. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say, but the play works in a way that does a really kind of important, there's a huge twist in the last act. And I think that it's sort of really is the kind of work that I want to see more of in 2032. It's written by a black female playwright. She is incredible. And I think that, you know, that's the kind of work that I want to see. It's like not necessarily, I don't think it's productive for us to cast queer people or for us to put Indian women in stories that you could literally switch them out and it could be a white girl and it would be the same story. I think our narratives are shaped and our identities are shaped by the experiences that we've had. And so when I say authentic, I mean like truly to that person, taking into account that person's entire existence.
Yes.
Yeah, Fairview, I did not like Fairview, actually. It's a hot take. No, I just, as a Black person, you know, spoiler, I'm gonna spoil the play. The ending where they made all the white people get on stage and like look at the Black people on stage, I just felt like wasn't effective, because it was like this overall like larger reminder of like Black people not having access to theater, and the classism that exists in the theater world. And I think that kind of like negated the point of like what that final like moment was supposed to be. Yeah, I think, you know, what I would love is work by Black people that has nothing to do with our drama. Like I would love to just see like two Black women fall in love. That's the kind of content that I'm interested in. Like just two queer Black women figuring out life, you know, being quirky or whatever. And that's what I would like to see. Yeah, I'm tired of the like trauma porn. You know, I need more joyful stories. I need more joy, because joy, in the same way that anger is a weapon, joy can also be an incredible weapon in the fight against white supremacy and in the fight against all of these things. Because they don't want, especially for people of color and for queer people, like your joy is directly like in opposition to what people want from you.
Absolutely.
Politicize that and like celebrate that. So I would like, yeah, by 2032, honestly, more joy.
And less queer death. I feel like every damn story I read, every script I get sent that like that, or everything that wants to be produced always is like somewhat, I mean, again, and these things exist, you know, AIDS, like trauma, violence, all these things exist, but it's like, I don't want to read one more script about someone dying of AIDS. I don't want to read like someone being violently beaten by, you know, someone that like a sex worker being violently beaten. I just think that like those stories have their place, but I just think we've seen so much, and just like what Mikaela said, I think it's so important that we see, you know, people just living their lives and just truly experiencing joy in their life the way that everyone should be able to.
Yeah, well said. I want to live in that future too. We have some questions from the audience which I want to address. Paul Levy asks, and this he asks, I wonder how we can help create a culture where celebration of other, in quotes, is a core default societal value. Of course, it begins in early year education, but how can we transition into a natural delight in difference? How could that become fundamentally natural? I think a love of storytelling is a start, but diversity should engender a sharp intake of celebratory breath. I just want to add to that, or not add, just a comment that like a celebration of the other to me is problematic, because the other, and that's something that in my experience as an American I was very present to it, especially that I have an accent and I have a name that is Arabic, that I was othered in every space I moved through despite my white privilege. And so this concept of otherness is really something I hope that in the future will not exist. But what is your response to that question?
I think for me, at least, it starts with us dismantling this like very neoliberal, like thing that we were all brought up, a lot of us were brought up with, which is like color blindness, or like we're one world and we all have the same heart, we all bleed red. I think that there's a way in which like language around racism was very centered on that for at least an early part of like the late 90s and early 2000s. And I think that, to your point, Paul, I think like, you know, it's not about celebrating the other, but it's about saying like we're different, and like that is like the thing, you know what I mean? Like that's it's about saying we're different, and like you haven't had these same experiences that I have, and it still matters, and here's why. And I think that that's just, you know, the sort of like what I think that we can, that's where I think we can sort of like move. That's the first step, at least.
Yeah, Paul, I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question. Do you want to unmute yourself and maybe share it?
Yeah, hi. Just to clarify, I think when I was hearing you talking, was just thinking actually of some of the science fiction books that were around gender initially, that were pointing at futures where what I'm talking about, celebration and other, is not rooted in the kind of dialogue today, which I thoroughly, you know, respect and understand and have struggled with myself in a Jewish culture. It's looking hopefully at a future where it's almost no longer an issue, because there's a sort of generic, almost you know, it's in our core self that we would all, I couldn't be happy if somebody else wasn't happy. There's a sense of integration maybe in the future where this normalizes into just a core value, you know, and it sounds a bit idealistic, I know, but a sort of a natural tolerance that's as natural as air. And it's not tolerance of a negative thing. It's a tolerance that feels nutritional almost.
Mm.
And were you specifically referring referring to diversity or to queer culture, or?
I think I was just resonating with what was said, because I spend a lot of time in the theatre review mode, particularly at the Edinburgh Festival. And there, as everyone said, there are so many kind of polarized shows, and shows that, particularly in the trans world and in the gender world and in the cultural world, that try to get audience by, you know, having someone die, you know, having a kind of distorted drama, as if like life's always like that. But if somehow in the future this stuff gets as normalized as other parts of our life, then we can enter into it in a much more kind of healthful way. But we're not there, and I think I'm just kind of hopeful that we could get to a place. I think it starts with what children learn at all ages, where loving other people is that other disperses into just the kind of natural state in all of us. It's very, very utopian, I know.
Yeah, but you're describing something, you know, that is directly rooted in this conversation of bringing transformative justice into every aspect of what we do, which is the foundation. And like, we have to rethink America, because America, we're very individualistic in our thinking, and we really only care about ourselves, and we really only care about the upward mobility of like our own, you know, we don't think about community, and that's how we got here. Is that it's a very every person for themselves kind of mindset. So I absolutely agree that we have to start refounding, like different foundations. Yeah, unless it's someone that looks like you. So, you know, yes, the American education system also needs to be dismantled, abolished, and rebuilt with love and community at its core, and at its like in the praxis. And like, if our praxis is not rooted in love and community, accountability, and like radical transformation in every aspect, then, you know, nothing is going to get done. So I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And moving away from tolerance and towards acceptance, I think, is also just a huge part of that.
Yeah. I want to point out something that Mikaela mentioned in our land acknowledgement, and in this indigenous concept of the two spirits. And then a lot of ancient cultures, I mean, racism is a social construct, as is gender. And so I think that's important also. Like, it's maybe we need to go back to our past to meet our future. Yeah, that's also something that is a recurring theme for us here at Resilience, honoring and amplifying Indigenous and ancient wisdom that seems to have been vilified. Jassy, do you have a question or a comment? We'd love for you to. You've been very active in the chat, and we're really happy you're with us.
Thank you, Noor. So much to address here. But in terms of the research I've done on psychology and even internalized oppression, I was talking to a friend about it this week and I found a book about it if anyone's interested in looking at it. But
yes, please drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll find the title. But I just realized, because like in every psych class I've had, we've had to evaluate like some type of text, and always the question you want to ask is like, is this generalizable? Which means like, is it seen in other places? Is the results like seen elsewhere? And I realized that could be a mechanism for oppression, just the external validity, because not every culture is the same, and that's okay. So just thinking about it in terms of there's individuality to be celebrated and cherished, instead of just thinking like my way is the best way or coming from an ethnocentric lens, I think can further distance us from that oppressive thinking.
It's a really good point.
Yes. Thank you for that, Jassy, and thank you for your question also, Paul. Did I miss any questions from the chat, Christy, that I'm not seeing right now? But do keep your questions coming, or we'd also love to hear from you. I do want to, we did talk about the things that we hope for in the future. We touched on some of the things that we fear currently. I think in the context of talking about things like climate change, for example, we look at certain tangible events that can happen within the next 12 years, or in actions that can be taken that will impact what will happen for decades to come. What are some tipping points that you anticipate over the next 12 years that require our attention for us to imagine the queer futures that we want?
What are events? I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yes, what are tipping points or major events or actions, or whether it's a legislation or a decision that will that you think will happen or requires our attention over the next 12 years that will kind of shape the queer future that we want, or the queer futures?
Even milestones and metrics to hit, like what are things that we can look towards or be aiming for?
I don't know if I have anything concrete. All I can think about is like Gen Z becoming adults, because like Gen Z is killing it. I was born in '96, so I don't really know where I fall. I'm either like an early, the oldest Gen Z or the youngest. Yeah, Zillennial.
You're a Zillennial.
Millennial, thank you.
So I didn't know that was the term. Love that. But like these kids are not afraid of anything. They're not backing down, and they can't even vote yet. Like they're, I'm so excited to watch this next generation come up, because the way that they are just so bold, so unafraid, so willing to like have these conversations, have like, been planning protests and marches, and just like youth, I so believe in youth, specifically like the generation that's right underneath me. They are incredible. I love them. And I think that like a big thing that we're going to see is like when these people grow up and are able to be in positions of power and really start to use their voice, even like past, TikTok and Instagram, and are really like going to be people that we can turn to and look up to. I think that's going to be really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I think in just being very hyper specific in my industry, there's a lot of conversations happening now around inclusion riders and mandates and seeing studios and production companies sort of like increase the kind of work that they're taking on. You know, I have been really trying to figure out like what is the best way in which we can see tactical, forward-moving change in the entertainment industry, specifically within film, TV, theater, and publishing. And does that mean, you know, really putting our money where our mouth is and trying to create mentorship and networking opportunities? Does that mean hosting workshops? Does that mean hosting pitch fests? Does that mean, you know, creating a mandate for our production company that 50% of the slate needs to be queer or like person of color led? Like I think that there's ways in which at least the conversation in entertainment is now, I shouldn't say entertainment, in Hollywood is really trying to be focused and intentional and tactical ways to make change. And so, you know, I think it will be a milestone and markers just to see what our movies and what our art is like in 2032. Does our art reflect the moment? Does our art reflect the passion and the zeal that Mikaela said that Gen Z, that we're all seeing Gen Z has? Does the cultural products of this country reflect the movement of the last, you know, however many years? I think that'll be our benchmark. I think that, you know, what I don't want to see is like us fall into the traps of, oh, well, this year all the categories in the Oscars were dominated by people of color. Like that to me is sort of is great, but that falls into like a visibility trap moment. I want to see like genuinely, does our work reflect the moment that we're living in 12 years from now?
Yeah. Nor you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Really important point. I wanted to address a question that we had from Mina. That is, do you see less talk these days about progressive ideals being unrealistic? Are so-called regular folks seeing that rethinking whole systems is not only possible, but has been happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really incredible about this moment is our what's incredible about this moment is like, yes, things are happening now, and we're also acknowledging the things that have happened in the past. Be like, oh, there's actually, we can rethink this. We can actually rethink this. Yeah, I think there is. I honestly didn't think, as somebody who's been doing police reform work for the past just like 40 years, that we would have this kind of more like neutral kind of conversation of like, yeah, defund, like abolish, like not just, you know, like people are having that language and using that. And that's very exciting to me. The fact that like Angela Davis is finally getting some of her roses, you know, and getting some of her like the recognition, and also seeing things that she's been fighting for years, which horrible that she in her entire lifetime, you know, this is as far as we've got, which is peanuts. But, you know, we are seeing that kind of conversation. And what's so exciting to me is, yeah, we're talking about massive change. We're tearing down monuments, we're renaming things, we're reclaiming history, we're rewriting things. History is being rewritten in real time. And, you know, my concern is momentum. My concern is that, you know, with the electricity of this moment, I do anticipate it fizzling out at some point, and I'm wondering when the next surge will be, if that'll be at at another site of Black Death, or if there's enough to people going right now. I am skeptical of that, and what allyship looks like when there's not a Black person being hashtagged as a news, you know, in the news cycle. Like, what happens when the news dies down? Are you still going to be here fighting for us and with us? But yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot more talk that have progressive ideas that seem, you know, attainable in our lifetime in a way that I haven't really experienced before. And like I was saying, you know, when this moment was kind of starting, I was talking to my mom and I was like, yeah, I mean, that feels, you know, it feels different this time. Like I remember the uprisings with Michael Brown, and you know, that was a very big moment, and there were marches and there were a lot happening. I got arrested during the time of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, and you know, that was a moment, but those were kind of felt a little bit more siloed, and this is like, oh no, we're opening everything up again, because not only are we going to be talking about like the police and police violence against Black and brown bodies, we're going to talk about trans issues, we're going to talk about the prison industrial complex, we're going to talk about how companies can hold themselves accountable. You know, we're starting to ask for more from our universities, from our employers, from our, you know, we're demanding more, and we're demanding accountability. And it's really exciting. I feel like the conversation has definitely gotten more progressive. But I also understand that, like, I'm 24, I'm a Black queer woman, and I live in New York. So I do exist in like a pretty safe, you know, abolitionist bubble, and I understand that there are a lot of people that this conversation is not reaching, and I am interested in like what that would look like and how we make this conversation global, because I there is a lot of momentum here, and I want us to act on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, it's really surprising that we are moving forward in this time with intersectionality. You know, I mean, I have been to local protests here where I am in South Jersey, in towns that I never thought would have them. And you're seeing a majority of people carrying like Black Trans Lives Matter signs. And that's something that just, I think, you know, to Mina's point, it's like that might have been something that was unthinkable, you know, 20 years ago. Same thing, you know, we started this by talking about marriage. I think that there are a lot of people in this country for whom like the idea of gay people being able to get married was like a completely wildly unrealistic thing. And it happened. And so I think it's really important for us, those of us who want to participate in the resistance, to always challenge that. Like, yes, I always kind of love what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said once when she was asked about being a radical. She's like, I exist as a radical because if I'm at Z and the country's at A, we can get people to like W, you know? And I think that like, that is the project, and like that's why we should never sort of like back down from some of these ideas. Yes, will abolition happen tomorrow? No. Will liberation happen tomorrow? No. But it doesn't mean that we should stop pushing for pushing for that. And I completely agree with, I think, what Jazzy just said about like creating an archive of this moment. That's equally as important. You know, as a tool of resistance to look back on and you know, really think about archiving the archive as a tool of resistance.
Yeah, you bringing it back to AOC brought up a question that I had earlier, and we talk a lot about like dismantling systems and how like the systems are broken and they just need to be replaced and not fixed. But I feel like a lot of times we don't go the step further to understand like, okay, well, how are these systems functioning so that we can dismantle them? And, or not we, like everyone, but like the average person that's hearing these conversations, or a lot of people, I don't know what percentage, but anyway, the need to like understand how the systems function and what are we proposing to replace them with. So I was wondering if you guys have resources to share about like digging into that learning process, and then specifically around politicians, like are there people we should be looking at policy wise and voting for, or yeah, what are your opinions on?
I personally don't trust any government official, so I am not the one to you know, kind of advocate for those types of things. I sincerely just don't believe anybody working at any level inside I just don't trust it. That may be a little tinfoil hatty of me, but yeah, I am a big proponent and big believer in transformative justice, which is, you know, a framework that I've brought up a couple of times. There's a wonderful book about all of these ways that we can focus on community care. It's called Beyond Survival, Stories in the Transformative Justice Movement. And it has been an incredibly helpful kind of textbook for me to learn about what community care looks like, what active alternatives we already have to the police and to these negative systems are. One of the things that I engage in is restorative justice healing circles with youth who are incarcerated. So it's the idea of I work for Soul Sisters Leadership Collective, and we offer an alternative to incarceration through restorative justice healing circles. So you talk about the harm that has been done. the harm that you have caused, and how we can repair and work from, you know, that harm. And harm reduction is a very big thing that we can talk about. And what really needs to happen, and what is happening, you know, what you can see in that book is the prioritization of community care. And chances are in your community, there is something in place that uses this framework that just needs a little bit more of a push. And I think that, like, if we continue to have this conversation and build on what this society transformed would look like, you know, it is community. It's not government, it's no one in a position of power. Like the biggest change that are happening are like from the people in your neighborhood that are feeding people, the people in your neighborhood that are just like saw a need and filled it. And, you know, prioritizing that and understanding that and really getting to know your community, especially like from New York, like walking, like knowing who you know who your people are and know who the people are in your neighborhood, in your community, is one of the best ways that we can start. Because I cannot stress like community care and like that engagement enough.
Yes, such an important point. Have you heard of caremongering? That yeah, it's kind of like I love the concept of caremongering that we are yet to see in our communities. But yes, know your neighborhood and know your neighbors. That is such an important message. Soham, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Mikaela. I would say that, like, I don't have a lot of, I don't know if I have a lot of faith, but I do believe that there is kind of, there's merit in at least trying to activate, you know, communities, disenfranchised communities to get politically engaged to some degree. And so I do believe, like, I am hopeful, and I think that we've seen some good news coming out of even these primaries. Jamal Bowman out of New York, Charles Booker in Kentucky. You know, I think that there are sort of like moments that should give us hope. I think that you know, the political system is very broken, as Mikaela said, and I think that like transformative justice is 100% our future, and I think the place that we need to be going. I just think that, you know, there are people, and it's so true what you said about just knowing your people. I mean, I've seen, I'm sure we've all seen the graphics going around about like alternatives to calling 911 in your city, and like those are the places that we can start doing the kind of like radical transformative justice work. But you know, I also believe, like, I don't know if it's an either or. I kind of want to see both happen. And so, you know, there are, like, I still believe, like, seeing in Kentucky, it was crazy that people were literally banging on the doors to be able to vote. But, you know, hopefully the political process can also change, and that we can also start to see a kind of increase in our elected officials reflecting the things that we believe right now. And so I think that, to me, it's both if possible. But I agree mostly with Mikaela that, you know, there's so much distrust and kind of like cynicism there. I agree with you. Like, I don't know if that's the number one place where that kind of reckoning will take place, but I don't think it's without its own merit, you know?
Not, but I mean, like, look at the Black Panther Party, right? Like, classic example of community care. Not only were they protecting their own and like really just so blatantly in the face of white supremacy, like guns, you know, guns out, like berets on, they were also feeding children. They were like, our kids need to eat, and we're going to feed them. That was just them just doing that, you know, and it's a very, like, it worked. Kids got fed. And government was incredibly threatened by the presence of the Black Panther Party, which is why it got disbanded and so many people were killed. But they had their 10-point program, or their 10 points, like, are still incredibly applicable today. I just, like, the power of the people is what I believe in, and that I feel like we can win, but doing that, like, being together in this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for these really important points. We have 5 minutes left for our conversation, and I want to close out with your call to actions. There are so many call to actions that were surfaced in this conversation. And I also very quickly want to point out something that was mentioned in the chat that I found really exciting about the fact that Paul mentions that the recorded Zoom calls, as we talk about history and perspective history, that also Makeda mentioned, that these Zoom calls will become a new and growing form of historical documentation. And apparently AI will soon enable them to be more easily searched. But yes, this is a resource for future generations. And thank you for being a part of this conversation. And in reflecting on the present, on the past, on the future, your call to actions. Mine is vote.
Yeah, I think mine would be, engage beyond social media, which I think is something that we're seeing, like something that people are talking about now. I really want to see the kind of like the memification of this moment kind of stop a little, because it's making me a little uncomfortable. But I think, moving beyond social media, showing up, it's something I'm struggling with, not being in the city and attending sort of the local community protests here has been different, because they're not engaging in the same ways, and the push maybe isn't as radical, but it's important to I think engage in the space that you're in. And as Mikaela, that's the number one takeaway, is know who your people are and try to figure out what your community needs. Like, I think down here in rural South Jersey, like the threat of white nationalist militias is a lot more present than it is in New York. And so people here are at least in my experience going to some of these protests, aren't as radically anti-police as maybe I want them to be, or as we believe they should be, but because their communities believe that that's what's necessary. And so I think it's about being in your community, saying these are all our alternatives, and listening during that engagement. Know when to listen, know when to shut up and not speak, and also know when your voice and your body is of use.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And I also just keep learning. Every opportunity is a learning moment. Education is so important. Educate and share your information. Know and understand the complexity and the necessity of being a full-time accomplice to marginalized identities. It's work, it's a job. You should treat it like it's the most important job that you have, because it's a matter of life and death. And show up in real time and don't quit. Stay loud, stay vigilant, stay active, know who your people are, and listen to, invest in, and uplift Black queer women.
Yes.
Follow Mikaela on Instagram. She's an amazing resource to follow for protesters, for just anybody trying to do the work. We were just talking about it before everyone got on, but it really is, her Instagram is like a guidebook for the resistance right now, and I can't shout her out enough.
Thank you. I also just want to very quickly personal promote. I run this fund called the Black Women Defense Fund. We are working on getting handgun licensing fees and paying for self-defense classes for Black women, in addition to sending out tasers and pepper spray in kits to Black women specifically. We are going to start rolling out free self-defense classes for Black women on Zoom, in addition to yoga for trauma survivors and a class about gun safety with a Black woman gun owner next week. Still looking for donations. The Instagram is Black Woman Defense, I think. I'll send the link to the Instagram for all that information, but that is something that I care a lot about, to make sure that Black women feel safe, and would love the support. Thank you, Christy, so fast.
And also, I think we were talking earlier, Mikaela mentioned the Ochre Project, which is an organization that I really, really support and is doing incredible work for trans women in the food space. I really support Glitz as well, which just last week reached their $1 million goal to buy property or to lease property for trans women who've been released from Rikers. And then I also really like to support House of Gigi, which is an organization based, I believe, in Georgia. Similar to Glitz, it's a space for Black trans women and trans women of color to live who are without a home, and also to learn leadership skills, civic engagement, etc., so that they can participate in their community's political stuff as well. So those are just like a couple organizations that I wanted to shout out in closing as well.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.